One of the ways that I've been able to grow my business over the past few years has been through the use of this podcast. And specifically, I've been able to market the podcast with Instagram and Instagram Reels, even more specific. So on today's part one of this two-part series, I'm going to walk you through how I put together the marketing plan for the Focus and Bloom podcast. Stick around. What's up, everybody? This is Jasenia from Focus and Bloom, and here I share a variety of tips and tactics to help you up-level your content creation game. So sometimes I talk about photography tips for social media or video tips or podcasting tips like today. So if you like that type of content, be sure to click subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast, the Focus and Bloom podcast, on iTunes or Spotify. Y si hablas español, visita mi canal de YouTube, Focus and Bloom en español, en donde puedes conseguir acceso a mi nuevo podcast, The Focus and Bloom Podcast en español. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about marketing your podcast. So let me say that there are several steps that you want to think ahead of pressing record and starting to record that podcast episode, whether you're doing it in just audio format or video format. So think about it in a three-phase. You have the pre-production where you're planning everything out. You have the production when you're actually recording it. And then you've got the post-production editing and mixed in with distribution. I sometimes just mix it all together, but you can put distribution in its own thing. But without getting too techy on that, I really want you to think about how you plan everything and how you plan that episode as a whole and how that episode fits in the general scope of your podcast season and the general scope of your business year. Are you planning any launches? Are you going on vacation soon or at a certain point? Are you doing any sort of collaboration? Are you speaking somewhere else? These are very important things that you want to keep in mind when you're planning out the season, because you want to make sure that the type of content that you're speaking about in your podcast is tied to these other aspects of your business, because it's going to make it easy for you to market that other product, that future launch, for example. So needless to say, you want to make sure that whatever it is that you're putting out there for your podcast, it is delivering value to your audience and helping answer some of those common, frequently asked questions. So now I'm going to walk you through the steps I take when I plan both my podcasts, the Focus and Bloom podcast and the Focus and Bloom podcast en español, which is the Spanish version of this 2-year podcast that I've already been running, which aired this summer. So the first thing you want to know when you are planning out the podcast or the episode is, are you going to have a solo episode or are you going to have a episode that has a guest? Once you've determined that, then you proceed with the next step, which in my case would be to creating a script. Now, I want to take a quick pause on creating a script because season 1 of the Focus and Bloom podcast was an audio-only podcast. And I started with just writing quick notes. And then eventually I went ahead and wrote every single episode, like word by word. And that would take me so long. And it was so frustrating and so time-consuming and stressful, because I just had this pressure that I needed to make this amount of words and this amount of space and format it in such a way that every page would feel like a minute. And this is coming from a film background, I have a film background where when you look at a film script, each page is formatted in such a way where each page represents an actual minute. So I was coming from that, from that side. Now, I did it for a couple of episodes and it was just so much. And then I started incorporating guests and I really loved it because I was still creating a script, but it was shorter. I only had a couple of guiding questions. And I learned this from when I was producing another show on YouTube for a photographer, where when she would interview a lot of other photographers, she would have a couple of questions that she would send them or just pre-discuss with them a couple of minutes before actually recording the episode. So I'm taking from these past experiences and diving and putting them into this production. So now what I've been doing is I still have a script template that I've created, and that template has a couple of outlines of important things that I need to make sure that I talk about and hit as I am delivering my message and my talk here in this podcast. And I do that for both. I still do it for both the solo episodes and the episodes that feature a guest. The difference is that I only have in the solo episodes, I only have a couple of bullet points that I want to talk about. And in the case of episodes where I have a guest, I have a series of questions, guiding questions that I send them before the episode as a way for them to get an idea of what we're going to be talking about. And also for me not to lose track of time and not to lose track of the overall goal of that particular episode. And after I've done this, a lot of the guests have told me that they really appreciate me sending these questions ahead because they feel that they can prepare better, but also it shows that you've taken the time to look through their work. So that's part of the research too, but I'm not going to dive into that really. I'm just going to say that I do look at people's social media platforms and their website and see what they offer. And then that's one of the ways that I determine if I'm going to reach out to them for a podcast episode, or maybe they reach out to me first and then I look through their information and then I go from there. Whether they've contacted me or I've contacted them, when I have an episode that has a guest, once that guest is confirmed by saying, yes, I'm interested in participating in your podcast, then the next thing that I do is I send them an email with a link where they can do two things. One is fill out a guest questionnaire where they put their name, their social media, email, contact information, links to any relevant information that they would like for me to include in the show notes. And there's also a calendar in that link where they can then schedule the day to do the recording. And I've already predetermined this in the backend. I use Honeybook for this. Honeybook is my CRM and I pretty much organize everything there. So I use a link within Honeybook that is connected to my calendar, and then that's what I send them to record. So I've already predetermined that. And if you're interested in Honeybook or just having a CRM for your business, click the link in the description to check out Honeybook and try it. There's a nice deal for you if you're trying it out. Now that pre-production process is already done, whether it's a solo episode or an episode with a guest, the next thing is to do the recording. Now, once the recording is done, then I can put together graphics to promote the podcast. And I do this in Canva, and I do graphics for Instagram Reels, for stories, for the cover that I'll use for the podcast itself, on the website, a Pinterest graphic, as well as a YouTube cover, because this is a video podcast. So my podcast is in audio format and there's an actual video in YouTube. Something that I also do as part of the pre-production is I make sure that I have these show notes available for me so that I can then repurpose that into other content where it would involve having some written content, specifically an email and a blog post, which goes on my website and has all the show notes and a little bit more for that particular episode. Other things that I also do during that recording session is that I like to take a selfie from the screenshot and then share it on social media and just tag them as I'm getting ready. So that sort of creates a little bit of anticipation prior to that recording. And I mean, again, it is Instagram story. So it's a really great way for you to kind of get a glimpse, or show a glimpse actually, of what you're doing, what your day-to-day is, or your day-to-day might look like on a production day. Now, without going into, I feel like right now I'm going to go a little bit more into the post-production and everything. So I'm going to cut it right here, and I'm going to have you tune into the next episode where I dive a little bit more into how I then take this recording, take all this work that I've already created and put it into motion, where I am now promoting my podcast on Instagram and all these other different platforms. So if you enjoy this type of content, if you're really curious about creating a video podcast or even just a podcast audio format, just starting simple, then you want to make sure to check out my video podcast guide. It's a freebie. You can check it out and just by clicking on the link in the description, or just check out today's show note. It's for free. There's a lot of information on gear recommendations, as well as a walkthrough of my workflow, pretty much what I'm talking about today, that you can then look into and see if you're already creating a podcast, then that would be really cool for you to look at what I see. And maybe there's something that you can pick and choose and add into your production workflow. And if you're starting brand new, then that will give you a really good base to get your podcast off the ground. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes and or Spotify, because this will give me a really great idea of how you're feeling the podcast, if you're enjoying this type of content, and just for me to create more content to help you navigate this content creation world. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next episode.